Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Lynne Hardy, who is the line editor for Rivers of London and an associate editor for Call of Cthulhu, and we talked about gender in gaming. Everybody in the tabletop role-playing game space has their own unique perspective. And Lynne, who has been a player and a professional in the space for decades, shares hers. What's changing, what's the same, and what's different about being a woman in the TTRPG space? I'll jump across to that interview in just a moment, but first, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.
Tabletop role-playing industry is different in some areas for women. The traditional publishing route is very male-dominated, although there are several leading lights in terms of women in the industry. The independent indie gaming side of things is much more diverse in terms of the number of women and non-binary people who are in there.
You've talked in the past about how your professional background was in STEM. Would it be fair to say that the TTRPG industry is a little bit similar to the STEM industry in how it's set up?
I think there certainly can be, actually, yes. Because, I mean, my field is biomedical sciences, which is typically the one that has more women in it, or it has more towards parity, possibly even slightly more women, as I said, as opposed to physics, maths, and chemistry, which tend to still skew towards the male end of the spectrum. Now, again, that does sort of parallel the indie versus traditional RPG publishing streams in the fact that, most of the time when I was doing my degree, my PhD, I was surrounded by women who were technicians, researchers, group leaders. Okay, most of the professors were still male, but that was starting to change. Certainly from my experiences as a lecturer, there were always a lot of women on the biomedical sciences courses because of this rather unfortunate and somewhat sexist view that biology is easy compared to physics and maths and chemistry, not understanding that biology and biomedical sciences is the complete synthesis of all of them. So yeah, I think you can actually draw parallels from where I came from to where I am now. Plus, being a biomedical research scientist, it gave me a whole load of transferable skills that have been incredibly useful for working in the role-playing industry.
I'd be really interested to hear what some of those skills are.
Well, obviously, when you're doing research and in science, you've very much got to be able to manage your own time. You will have a project outline, and it's up to you to plan it and get on with it. So you have to be focused, you have to be able to do the research to understand what's going on in your field, what you can take, what you can develop, how you apply certain techniques, and how you interpret your results. So that time management and the research side of things certainly has been of a huge use to me in the role-playing industry.
I know that everybody's pathway into the TTRPG industry is different. And I imagine that if you're from an underrepresented part of the community, it can be even more different than the standard. What was your pathway in? You came in as a player, right?
I came into the hobby by being a player, and as I'm sure quite a few people who heard me speak before will know, through American football, wearing my Seattle Seahawks top to the first night of the Freshers' Party at Ethel Williams Hall at Newcastle. So I came in that route. But then later, when I went home during, I think it was probably the Christmas or the summer holiday at the end of my first year, I met up with the guys that I'd done my A levels with. Now I went to a comprehensive school. It was the only one in the village. The village was at that time the largest in England, allegedly. So, there were over 1,000 pupils in the school, but probably about 30 or so in the sixth form. So my science classes were very small, and most of us were in all of them. So the guys I'd actually done my biology A level with, apparently it turned out, had a gaming group. They'd played D&D for years, but they'd never asked me because they weren't sure it was the sort of thing that girls did. Thankfully, the group that I was with at university who introduced me to gaming had no such worries about that at all.
Considering that you came into the TTRPG space a long time ago, have you noticed changes over the years?
I think there has been a massive change. Again, splitting it down, if you look at the tabletop gaming industry, like I said, fewer women, but that has improved over time. And certainly with going to Gen Con, I went to Gen Con for the first time in 1994 when it was still in Milwaukee. And there were women there, but an awful lot of them were booth babes in chainmail bikinis who'd been employed to, make the booths look pretty, which was unfortunate. Um, then obviously when I went back again, after it had moved to Indianapolis, and I can't remember when the last time, probably about 8 years ago, that was the first time I'd gone back. And you could see there had been a massive shift. There were way more women there, way more families. So that was a really good sign. But when you come to live role playing, free forming, and LARPing, there's always been more women involved in that. And I don't know whether that's just an accessibility through university groups, whether playing dress up was seen as more acceptable, whether it was more kind of seen as an offshoot of amateur dramatics. I really don't know. But I think as well that a lot of portrayals of role-playing games in the media, certainly when I was growing up, really didn't help because, it was on the tail end of the Satanic Panic. We'd had E.T., which was one of the first times I remember seeing anything about role-playing games, but there'd been quite a few sort of like murder mystery things in Britain where role players had all been made out to be lunatics and dangerous psychopaths and things. So I think there was an accessibility issue in terms of just getting hold of the material. Certainly an accessibility issue in terms of, is this an appropriate thing for a young girl to be doing or a young woman to be doing? And thankfully, I think we are moving away from that, or we were moving away from that, unfortunately, with the rise of social media and unfettered ability to just spew nonsense without consequence. I think we're starting to see a few more problems again.
I suppose it's important to ask, is it true, as on the surface it can seem to appear, that the TTRPG industry is male dominated?
I would say in certain sectors, it certainly appears to be. Certainly the traditional industry has appeared more male dominated in the past. Like I said, that is changing, but what you tend to find is that women end up in less visible roles. So they're not necessarily at the top of the company, but they'll be doing a lot of the writing, they'll be doing a lot of the management, they'll be doing a lot of the artwork and graphics and things. I think it comes down to that issue of visibility. And what we really need to see is more women out there facing the consumers, the players, so that people know that they're there. That's definitely changing with the rise of actual play, live play. Women are becoming a lot more visible in the industry to what we were 10, 15 years ago. And that's a good thing. Because if you see people like you know that there is a place for you that will encourage younger, newer women and non-binary people and all of the marginalized communities to join in and come forward.
So the two main different sides I can see where your perspective might be different is from a professional perspective and a social perspective. I'd like to ask about your professional perspective first. Has there been any major differences?
I know I've been very lucky in the fact that I don't think it has particularly affected my work. There's been one or two instances where I've had my job mansplained to me, and people, certain freelancers have refused to take me seriously because I was a woman, in a way that they behaved in a certain way with me that they did not with male colleagues who had equivalent experience. And that's always frustrating. But you know what? Sod them. I know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to get on with my job. And unfortunately, that's the kind of attitude you have to take, because if you do let it stop you, then you're not going to get anywhere. Thankfully, I've always been stubborn and pig-headed, and I will see them in hell first, as my dad always used to say. So, I haven't let it stop me, but it could so easily have done. Thankfully, the vast majority of people that I've worked with have recognized my talents, recognized my skill set, and have helped me to develop it. But then again, I know that I have been lucky and I've been surrounded by good people.
What about socially? Has your experience been different from a social perspective?
Again, only in very specific circumstances. Like you said, I was very lucky with the group that I started with. There was absolutely no, oh, you're a girl, you can't do certain things. So, there were no limits on that. certainly within the live role-playing scene, which I was part of a lot through Durham University. Again, no real issues there. The only times it's happened has been in certain games conventions when I've either been running a game or I've been on a booth. And if you're there with a male colleague, certain members of the community, invariably men of a certain age, will default to talking to the man as opposed to you, even if you're the person who's the expert on that particular game, not the person who's standing next to you who, you know, has got great knowledge on something else, but wasn't involved with the thing that this person is then asking about. And that can get really frustrating because there is still this perception amongst certain groups that if you stand up for yourself, if you butt in, you're being difficult, you're being emotional. And again, it's frustrating, but yeah, so what? That's one bad apple. There are multiple sometimes, but most of the time I have been very lucky, apart from, say, the occasional unfortunate encounter. One of the things that obviously is, as a woman in gaming, that I have had to encounter, I mean, I've been very lucky in this, is the harassment side of things. The worst experience I had was when I was living in Salisbury. I was part of a gaming group there because I was on my own down there, didn't really know anybody, and I thought it would be a good thing to sort of get out, do some role playing, have some friends outside of work. And there was one lad there who he was in the army. He very obviously was suffering from PTSD, but he latched on to me as a sympathetic ear. Now, they knew I lived on the hospital grounds, but they didn't know where. And then one day he knocked on my door, which meant that he had to have been watching to see where I lived. And I was in the house on my own, and that was a deeply uncomfortable experience. And I made an excuse that I had to go into the labs to take care of some cells and just got out of there as quickly as I could. And I never went back. And this is the other thing that people generally aren't aware of unless they've been in that situation, is the fact that women do have to be careful in certain spaces and other marginalized communities, because they are more vulnerable just by sheer dint of a lack of numbers and a lack of accountability up until this point. That thankfully is starting to change.
So for people who might not know something like that, or who might not have any experience with something like that, is there any insight that you want to share?
Obviously, there are a lot of women who have had bad experiences in the industry because unfortunately they've come across predators who have exploited them and manipulated them for their own ends. Thankfully, those people are now being identified and they're being rooted out, which is making the community safer. But there's still a lot of work to do on that respect. But as I mentioned before, it's only through people's courage and bringing that forward that we can face that and we can root out those elements that really we don't want. They have no place in gaming, and they need to be dealt with. They need to be given an opportunity to redeem themselves, but unfortunately, far too often they prove that they're really not interested in that. And if we can get rid of them from the industry, then the industry as a whole will improve for everybody. And that's something, obviously, it's not easy. It's going to be very hard work to do, but it's something that has to be done to make the community safe, welcoming, and good and supportive for everyone who wants to join it.
So on that note, what are some things that everybody can do to try and create a more inclusive space in gaming?
I think things have changed massively, and I think most men in the gaming industry are starting to realize what women have had to put up with and other marginalized communities have had to put up with for a long, long time, because people aren't staying quiet about it anymore. But the main thing is that, just be aware that your experience is not the same as women, non-binary, marginalized communities, Black, Asian gamers experiences, because of the fact that, like you said, just sheer weight of numbers in the past. So just be aware. In terms of gaming, actually at a table, safety tools very useful and important in helping to make sure that people who aren't male are safe and feel comfortable gaming. One of the other things that I've seen multiple times over the years in tabletop gaming and LARPing is this is not an excuse for you to cop off with someone or to get off with someone or to romance someone who isn't interested. You know, the number of times I've seen guys trying to use their character as a way to initiate or further a relationship with a woman through her character. I could buy myself quite a decent dinner with it by now if I'd had a dollar for every or a pound for every time I'd seen it. And it's creepy, you know. No one's saying that you can't have relationships like that within a gaming group, but you know, it's all down to consent, it's all down to reading the room. You know, the role playing games, at least the ones that we do, are not there for that. They are not there for someone to attempt to engage in a romantic relationship with somebody unless that other person is willing. And again, this comes back to the safety tools and consent. As an example, Regency Cthulhu, you know, it's based on Jane Austen's books. Romance is one element of Jane Austen's books, as well as skewering political and social satire. So, of course, we have to have that in the game, but we've put in very, you know, clear guidelines about this is not for everyone. Make sure all of the players are comfortable with this aspect of it. Accept if players aren't and move on, and do not use this as an excuse for anything creepy.
Do you have in your mind an example of a really inclusive space, like a really good spot, something to emulate?
In terms of really good experiences, what you need to look for, certainly in terms of conventions, are conventions that have clear safety guidelines and clear procedures. Now, I know that in the past, some conventions have thought, oh, well, if we have these, then that means that we're suggesting that there's an issue. And it's like, well, no, there probably is an issue. You're just not necessarily aware of it. So if you've got a convention that's got a clear set of safety guidelines, anti-harassment policies, it means that in the unfortunate event that something does happen, then there are systems and people who will back you up and make sure that you're safe. Look for conventions that go out of their way to make the environment safe. So things like OrcaCon in Seattle, which is a very diverse, very safe convention. If you can, go with friends. Try a friendly local gaming store, see if they've got groups that can help you. Meet on neutral ground. That's always a good one. You know, ask around about groups. Talk to people. Again, talk to your friendly local gaming store, friendly local comic store, wherever, board game cafe. See if they have groups, if they know people, because they usually will, and they should be able to give you advice and steer you right. But mostly, give it a go. Just try. You know, there are a lot of very good people out there. Things are far more diverse than they were. Things are far safer in many respects than they were. And don't let it stop you. You know, if there is an issue, get help, get someone to deal with it, but don't let that prevent you, because fear is a terrible thing and it will stop the community expanding, and it shouldn't. The problems need confronting head on, and they need dealing with, not just avoiding. Avoiding anything just means that it festers and it just keeps going.
Is there anything that you'd mention to young women who are interested in entering the TTRPG space, either professionally or as players, who haven't done so yet?
Go for it. Have fun. Get yourselves out there. Be visible. Make your mark on the community. Be that via indie games, traditional games, tabletop games, live play, anything. Get yourselves in there and enjoy it.
This is a broad topic. We've covered a lot, and there's still so much more that we could go into. But for now, is there any summarized thoughts you'd like to give?
Some of the things we've talked about are very serious, quite grim, but we shouldn't lose hope. Those of you who've been watching Sandman lately will know what I'm referring to here when I say that, because let's face it, it's awesome. But hope is important. Hope has let's face it, what's keeping the role-playing industry going through some fairly tough times in the past. And it's going to be hard work. We shouldn't be afraid of that. But if we put the work in, role-playing is going to be so much better for it. So I do have hope. I have hope because there are some amazing people, women and others, who are working very hard to improve this industry and make it a welcoming place for everyone. Follow them on various social media platforms. Be informed. Keep your eyes open. Learn. We're never too old to learn. Sit down and re-examine some of your prejudices. Again, it's going to be hard, but you'll be a better person for it. You'll be a better player for it as well. So yes, have hope, but don't be afraid to put the work in.